The word they loved most was barren. It was a stone they threw at me daily, a smooth, cruel word that left bruises no one could see. My husband would say it with a sigh of disappointment, a theatrical exhalation of his wasted legacy as he looked at my empty womb. His mother, however, would wield it like a sharpened blade. She would spit it into the air during family dinners, letting it hang there, poisoned and glittering, for all to see. Still no news. She'd ask, her eyes gleaming with a malicious pity that was far worse than outright hatred. The clock is ticking. A man needs an heir. A family needs children. A woman's purpose is to provide them. It's a shame, really. My son, my brilliant son, shackled to a barren wife. For 10 years, this was the soundtrack to my life, a symphony of my failure conducted by the two people who were supposed to love me most. In the beginning, I believed them. I internalized their disappointment until it became my own. I saw myself through their eyes, a faulty product, a beautiful but empty vessel, a promise unfulfilled. We went to doctors in the early years. The tests were inconclusive. Unexplained infertility, they called it, a sterile clinical term for a deeply personal hell. For them, unexplained was a verdict of my guilt. It was my fault, my body's secret, silent rebellion against its own purpose. My husband, who had once held my hand in waiting rooms, soon grew weary of the process. "If it's meant to be, it'll be," he started saying, apathetic and detached. What he meant was, "I'm done trying, the fault is yours, and I absolve myself of any responsibility." His mother encouraged this, of course. She would pat his hand and tell him he had been patient long enough, that he deserved a real family. The implication was always clear: he deserved a different wife. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of the life that was happening around me, but not to me. I would watch my husband play with his sister's children, a perfect portrait of the doting father he might have been, and his mother would always catch my eye, a smug, knowing look on her face that said, "See what you're denying him." The mockery was relentless and creative. If I bought a new dress, my mother-in-law would comment that it was a good thing I had disposable income since I wasn't spending it on diapers. If I suggested a vacation, my husband would say, "What's the point? It's just the two of us again." Every joy was tainted, every achievement minimized, all of it circling back to the one great lack in my life. I was childless, I was less. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event, it was a slow, creeping dawn of realization. It came in quiet moments, in the dead of night when my husband's snores filled the room and I was wide awake, tracing the patterns on the ceiling. I started to see their cruelty for what it was, a tool of control. They kept me small and ashamed because it made them feel powerful. My barrenness wasn't just a source of disappointment for them, it was a source of entertainment, a long-running drama in which I was the tragic, flawed protagonist, and I was tired of playing the part. A new feeling began to take root in the soil of my sorrow, a cold, hard anger. It was a foreign emotion, but it was potent. It was a flicker of a pilot light in a house that had been dark for a decade. The anger told me to fight back. Not by screaming or crying, not by engaging in their toxic games, but by taking back the narrative of my own life. If a child was what I wanted, I would have one, but it wouldn't be for them. It wouldn't be to save my marriage or to finally win the approval of a woman who would never give it. It would be for me. The idea of secret IVF was born from that anger. It was a crazy, audacious plan, a rebellion staged in the quiet, sterile rooms of a fertility clinic. I started saving money, siphoning off cash from the generous allowance my husband gave me to run the house. Pocket money, he called it, as if I were a child. I sold pieces of jewelry my own grandmother had left me, family heirlooms he and his mother had never bothered to ask about. I took on freelance work online, coding late into the night after they had gone to bed, my secret life illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. It was a slow and arduous process, but every dollar I saved felt like a brick in the wall of my new life. Finding a clinic was the next step. I chose one in a neighboring city, an hour's drive away. I would tell my husband I was joining a book club or taking a pottery class or visiting an old friend. The lies came surprisingly easily. After years of being deceitful by omission, by hiding my true feelings, outright fabrication felt like a natural progression. The first consultation was terrifying. I sat in a waiting room filled with couples, all of them holding hands, their shared anxiety and hope a tangible thing in the air. I was alone, a solitary island in a sea of togetherness. But as the doctor explained the process, the injections, the retrievals, the transfers, my fear was replaced by a steely resolve. This was a mountain I would climb alone. The injections were the hardest part. I would lock myself in the bathroom, my heart pounding, and administer the hormones myself. My body ached, I was constantly bloated, and my emotions were a roller coaster. There were days I would sit on the bathroom floor and cry, overwhelmed by the loneliness of it all, by the sheer unfairness of my situation. During one of those evenings, my mother-in-law had chosen to host a family dinner. I was feeling particularly fragile, my stomach bruised and tender from the injections. Her nephew had just announced his wife was pregnant with their third child. My mother-in-law made a toast. To family, she said, her eyes finding mine across the table. The most important thing in life, to new beginnings and the joy of children. Then she added, looking directly at me, some of us are blessed and some of us, well, we just take up space. The table fell silent. My husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. He never said anything. In that moment, her words didn't hurt me. They fueled me. I smiled back at her, a genuine, serene smile, and raised my glass of water. To new beginnings, I repeated, the secret of what was coursing through my veins, of the new beginning I was fighting for, a delicious, burning coal in my chest. The egg retrieval was scheduled. I told my husband I was going on a weekend wellness retreat with a friend. He barely looked up from his phone. Have fun, he mumbled. The procedure was painful and left me feeling drained, but the results were good. They had retrieved 10 viable eggs. A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. I had a chance. This was real. I lay in the recovery room, a heating pad on my abdomen, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of hope that was entirely my own. It wasn't tied to my husband's approval or my mother-in-law's acceptance. It was a private, precious thing, a seed I was nurturing in the dark. While my body was preparing for the embryo transfer, I was preparing for my escape. I met with a divorce lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman who listened to my story without judgment. I opened a new bank account in my own name. I started discreetly sorting through my belongings, packing away the things that truly mattered to me, the things that were mine before I became his. I was building an ark piece by piece, preparing for the flood that I knew was coming. The day of the transfer arrived. They chose the 2 healthiest embryos. Twin potential, the doctor said with a smile. I lay on the table, watching the microscopic specks of light appear on the ultrasound screen as they were transferred into my womb. It was the most surreal, most profound moment of my life. I walked out of the clinic into the bright sunshine, a secret smile on my face. I was a walking miracle, a vessel of hope. I went home to my husband and his mother, to their casual cruelty and their suffocating disappointment, and I felt nothing but a distant pity for them. They thought they knew me. They thought they had defined me by my emptiness. They had no idea that I was, at that very moment, fuller than I had ever been in my life. The 2-week wait was the longest 2 weeks of my existence. Every twinge, every cramp sent a jolt of either hope or despair through me. I lived in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of my life, a placid surface masking the turbulent ocean of my emotions. The day of the blood test, I could barely breathe. I drove to the clinic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I gave my blood and then I went home to wait for the call. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, unable to go inside. The house didn't feel like my home anymore. It was a museum of my unhappiness, a monument to a life I was about to leave behind. My phone rang. It was the clinic. I answered, my voice a barely audible squeak. I have your results, the nurse said, her voice warm and professional. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. Congratulations, she said, and the world stopped spinning. The test is positive. You're pregnant. The word pregnant echoed in the small, silent space of my car, a sound so immense it seemed to shake the very foundations of my world. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or even just of joy. They were tears of release, a decade of pent-up grief and shame and longing finally breaking free. I was pregnant. The word was a shield. It was a sword. It was the key to a door I thought was permanently locked, but the nurse wasn't finished. And based on your initial HCG levels, she continued, her voice filled with a gentle excitement, they are very, very high. The doctor thinks it's highly likely that both embryos implanted. We'll confirm on the ultrasound in a few weeks, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility of twins. Twins. The word landed with a soft, explosive force, knocking the air from my lungs for a second time. Twins. It wasn't just a new beginning, it was an abundance of life, a defiant, overwhelming answer to their years of calling me empty. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, mixing with the tears. It was too perfect. It was a plot twist worthy of a Greek tragedy, a karmic punchline delivered directly from the universe. The barren woman was going to have 2 babies. I finally went inside the house, my body thrumming with a secret energy so powerful I felt I could glow in the dark. My husband was on the couch watching TV, and my mother-in-law was in the kitchen clattering pots and pans. They barely acknowledged me. To them, I was just the same old furniture, the same disappointing fixture in their lives. The irony was exquisite. They sat there, smug in their judgment, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman they had written off was currently hosting a miracle, a double miracle right under their noses. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I lived a double life, my body secretly at work creating 2 new lives while I smiled and nodded and endured their endless barbs. The morning sickness was a challenge. I would run to the bathroom, blaming a stomach bug or something I ate. My mother-in-law would sniff disdainfully. A weak constitution, she'd pronounce. Everything about you is delicate. If she only knew, my fatigue was immense. I would excuse myself to take a nap and lie in bed, my hands resting on my still flat stomach, whispering to the tiny lives inside me. I told them everything. I told them how loved they were, how wanted they were, and I promised them a life free from the poison that had filled my own for so long. They were my secret, my allies, my future. Each day, my resolve hardened. Every dismissive comment from my husband, every cruel remark from his mother was another reason to leave, another confirmation that I was doing the right thing. He complained about the cost of a new car he wanted. I thought about the clinic bills I was paying off in secret. She mocked a neighbor for having a third child she couldn't afford. I thought about the nursery I was planning in my mind, a sanctuary of love and warmth I would build for my babies. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was the protagonist of my own, quietly orchestrating the final act behind the scenes. My lawyer had drafted the divorce papers. My new apartment, a small, sunny two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood across town, was secured. I had used my freelance income to pay the deposit and first month's rent. I began moving things out of the house piece by piece under the guise of spring cleaning and donating to charity. A box of books here, a bag of old clothes there. My photo albums, my personal documents, the few sentimental items that were truly mine, they never noticed. Why would they? I was just the background noise of their lives. The day of my first ultrasound was the day I chose to leave. It felt right. It was the day my pregnancy would become real, visible, undeniable. The day I would see my babies for the first time. I told my husband I was meeting a friend for lunch and then going shopping. He grunted in response, his eyes glued to the sports channel. At the clinic, I lay on the table, my heart a frantic drum. The technician put the cold gel on my stomach and then the probe, and then there they were, two tiny, flickering heartbeats on the screen, two small sacks side by side, my babies, my twins. The technician printed out a picture for me, and I clutched it in my hand like a holy relic all the way to my new apartment. The apartment was empty, save for a few boxes I had managed to smuggle over, but it was filled with light and promise. It was mine. I walked through the empty rooms, imagining them filled with the sounds of my children. I placed the ultrasound picture on the kitchen counter, the first object to officially make this place a home. Then I sat down and wrote the note. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. I had imagined screaming matches, tearful confrontations, dramatic pronouncements. But in the end, I chose quiet, devastating simplicity. My lawyer had advised it, no emotion, just facts. I took a piece of plain white paper and wrote, "I am leaving, our marriage is over, my lawyer will be in touch regarding the divorce. He will also have my new address if you need to send any of my remaining personal items." I paused, the pen hovering over the paper. I could have left it there. But they deserved one final blow, one final crushing piece of information to shatter the narrative they had so carefully constructed around me. I took the ultrasound picture from the counter, a picture of my two beautiful, thriving babies, and I taped it to the bottom of the note. And underneath it, I wrote one last sentence. "By the way, you were wrong. I'm not barren. I'm having twins." I drove back to the house one last time. It was empty. My husband was at the gym and my mother-in-law was at her weekly bridge game. The silence was a blessing. I walked into the kitchen and placed the note in the center of the table where they couldn't miss it. I took one last look around at the house that had been my prison for a decade. I felt no nostalgia, no sadness. Just the lightness of a burden finally set down. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I got in my car, turned off my phone, and drove towards my new life. I didn't know what the future held. I knew it would be hard. I knew I would be a single mother. I knew there would be a fight. But for the first time in 10 years, I was free. I was no longer the barren wife. I was a mother-to-be, the creator of my own family, the author of my own story. And as I drove, with the afternoon sun on my face and my hand resting protectively on my stomach, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that the best chapters were just beginning. The storm would come, I knew that. Their rage would be monumental, but I was ready. I was no longer a ghost in my own home. I was a fortress, and I had two very important reasons to be strong. They had thrown the word barren at me until I thought it was my name. But they had underestimated me. They had no idea that in the barren, desolate landscape of my marriage, I had been secretly cultivating a garden, a vibrant, resilient garden that was now, finally, in full and glorious bloom. The silence was a gift. For the first 48 hours in my new apartment, I kept my phone off, severing the digital umbilical cord that connected me to my old life. The quiet was profound, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city. It was in this quiet that I began to heal. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my few pieces of furniture, and taped the ultrasound picture to the wall beside my bed. It was the first thing I saw in the morning and the last thing I saw at night, a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. When I finally turned my phone back on, the predicted storm had arrived. A flood of missed calls and voicemails, a tidal wave of text messages, dozens from my husband, escalating from confusion, "Where are you? Your phone is off," to anger, "What is this joke? You think you can just leave?" to pure sputtering rage, "You will regret this." And then there were the messages from my mother-in-law, each one dripping with venom. She called the ultrasound picture a fake, a desperate, pathetic lie. She called me a monster for tearing her family apart. The vitriol was so intense it was almost comical. They simply could not process this new reality, one in which I was not the victim, one in which I held all the power. I didn't listen to all the voicemails. I didn't read all the texts. I saved a few of the most unhinged ones on my lawyer's advice, and then I blocked both of their numbers. My lawyer would be my shield from now on. She handled everything. When my husband's formal legal response came, it was exactly what we had expected. He denied the emotional abuse. He claimed he was a loving, supportive husband who was devastated by my sudden and inexplicable departure. And then, the main thrust of his argument, he demanded full custody of the unborn children. He claimed I was mentally unstable, that my deception in undergoing IVF proved I was an unfit mother. It was a desperate, transparent ploy orchestrated by his mother, who saw the twins not as grandchildren to be loved, but as a legacy to be claimed, a prize to be won back from the woman who had stolen them. This was where my meticulous planning paid off. We had everything. My diary, which I had kept for years, detailed every cruel remark, every instance of mockery. We had financial statements proving I had paid for the entire IVF procedure myself using my own funds. We even had a sworn affidavit from a family friend who had witnessed my mother-in-law's public humiliation of me on several occasions. Their case was built on lies, and mine was built on a mountain of truth. The pregnancy progressed, and with it my strength grew. I found a community, a prenatal yoga class, a support group for single mothers-to-be. I made friends, women who celebrated my growing belly, who listened to my fears and shared my excitement. I was building a new family, a chosen family, to surround my children with love and support. I learned that I was not delicate or weak. I was resilient. I navigated the aches and pains of a twin pregnancy, assembled cribs by myself, and attended every doctor's appointment, marveling at the two little beings growing inside me. I was creating a life, both literally and figuratively, from scratch. The legal battle raged in the background, a distant, unpleasant noise that my lawyer expertly managed. There were motions and depositions. My husband's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive, scheming woman, but under cross-examination, my husband's story fell apart. He couldn't name my obstetrician. He couldn't recall a single detail about the fertility struggles we had supposedly shared. He was exposed for what he was, a man who had been a passive, cruel spectator to his wife's deepest pain. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation for both of us. My report came back clean. His, however, noted narcissistic tendencies and an inability to empathize with his spouse's emotional state. The tide was turning. The day my twins were born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of my life, a boy and a girl. They were small but perfect, their tiny cries filling the delivery room with a sound that drowned out all the ugly words of the past. As I held them both in my arms for the first time, my son's dark hair reminding me of my own father, my daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I knew I had already won. This was the only victory that mattered. My ex-husband and his mother, in a final act of audacious cruelty, showed up at the hospital. They had found out about the birth through a mutual acquaintance. I had given strict instructions to the nursing staff, but my mother-in-law created such a scene in the lobby that a nurse came to my room to warn me. My lawyer was already on her way. I had them wait in the hallway. I had the nurse help me into my robe, and I walked to the door of my room, holding the frame for support. They stood there, looking flustered and angry. My mother-in-law's eyes immediately tried to peer past me, searching for the babies, for her legacy. "They're here to see the children," she announced, as if it were her undeniable right. I looked at her and then at the man I had spent a decade of my life with. I saw them clearly for the first time, stripped of all their power over me. They were just two bitter, unhappy people. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You're not. They are my son's children. They are my grandchildren," she hissed, her face contorting with rage. "No," I repeated, feeling a profound calm settle over me. "They are my children. They are not trophies, they are not a cure for your son's ego or a continuation of your precious family line. They are people, and they will be raised with love and kindness, and they will never, ever be subjected to the kind of cruelty you showed me." I looked at my ex-husband. "You had 10 years to be a partner to me," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You chose to be a critic. You don't get to be a father now. You didn't earn that right." My lawyer arrived then, a shark in a tailored suit, and ushered them away, talking about restraining orders and hospital security. I went back into my room and closed the door on them forever. The final court ruling came a few months later. I was granted sole physical and legal custody. He was given the option of supervised visitation twice a month at a designated facility, conditional on him completing an anger management course. His mother was to have no contact whatsoever. He never took the course, he never came to the visitations. It turned out, without his mother pulling the strings, his desire to be a father was non-existent. The legacy he had been so worried about was now an inconvenience. My life is full now. It is loud and messy and chaotic. It is filled with lullabies and diaper changes and the magical gummy smiles of my two beautiful babies. Some nights, when they are finally asleep, I sit in the quiet of my living room and look at the life I have built. I am no longer defined by what I lacked. I am defined by the abundance of love that fills my home. They tried to break me, to reduce me to a single ugly word, but they failed. Their cruelty was the catalyst for my rebellion. Their mockery was the fuel for my escape. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize I was a seed. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.